Hi there guys! In this video we're going to be looking at the Nazis' attitudes and policies towards minorities and Jewish people. For the Edexcel GCSE you need to know about the policies of the Nazis up to the outbreak of World War II, and therefore this video does not go into the persecution and murder of Europe's Jewish and minority populations during the war. I've put some links in the description if you'd like to learn more about the Shoah and the persecution of minorities after 1939, but remember, events after 1939 do not appear in the Edexcel GCSE exam. I just want to make it clear that I do not agree with any of the ideas that I'm teaching about in this video, and I strongly condemn racism, discrimination and violence in all its forms. As we've seen through the videos on the policies of the Nazis and life in Germany, the Nazis believed that the German Aryan race was superior to all other races. To quote the United States Holocaust Museum, the term Aryan often was used incorrectly to describe a racial grouping of people. Aryans, however, are not a race, and an Aryan master race does not exist. For the Nazis, however, this term referred to genetically white German nationals. At the beginning of the 20th century, a now immoral theory called Eugenics was popular. It was based on the ideas of Darwin's natural selection. The idea was that society could be improved by encouraging the best parents to breed and to prevent unsuitable parents from having children by means of sterilization, a process which makes the person infertile and unable to have children. The Nazis and others at the time took this theory a step further by promoting racial hygiene. This idea said that only the best parents from the best race should be encouraged to breed. As the Nazis believed that Aryans were superior to all other races, only Aryans should be allowed to have children. Racial hygiene, encouraging young people to choose their marriage partner carefully, was taught in schools, and laws were passed to prevent mixed-race marriages. You will remember that when Hitler was in prison, he wrote down his ideas about race, and particularly his hatred of the Jews, in his book Mein Kampf. In the book, he described the Herrenvolk, or master race, as he saw the Aryan Germans, and raved about the Untermenschen, or subhumans, which was how he described other European races such as the Slavs. For him, the worst of all were the Roma and Jewish people, whom he described as lebensunwertes, or unworthy of life. Hitler was not alone in his anti-Semitic beliefs. The Jewish population of Europe had suffered persecution for hundreds of years. They had been blamed for the Black Death, the Great Fire of London, and even the Jack the Ripper murders. The reasons for this are complicated, but there are a couple of theories which try to explain it. And though Jewish people had lived in Europe for over 1,000 years, some of their customs and religious practices set them apart from the predominantly Christian population. This caused suspicion and fear. Another explanation is that Christians blamed the Jewish people for the execution of Christ. Laws about money lending set the Jewish people apart. Up until at least the 16th century, Christians were forbidden to borrow or lend money by the Catholic Church. Jewish people, of course, were not bound by these rules. This meant that some Jewish people became rich through lending money, and this caused resentment among the Christian population. Whatever the root cause, in Germany, anti-Semitism was common. The Germany of World War I had only existed since 1871. Nationalist sentiments were strong. Opposition to the other was heightened to bring about a strong and united Germany. It is also true that when times are hard, people often blame those they see as not being part of their own society. You will have seen this all around the world, even today. With the humiliating defeat in World War I and the political and economic problems of the 1920s, many in Germany were ready to look for scapegoats on whom to blame their troubles. It is also worth noting that Hitler was not the only anti-Semitic nationalist leader in Germany. However, once Hitler came to power in 1933, he was able to pursue his anti-Semitism with a free rein. Jewish people were not the only persecuted group of people. One of the other groups was the Slavs. This was a group who had migrated to Eastern Europe from the East at around 2,000 years ago. Germans were instructed to treat members of this group differently. School lessons and propaganda were rife, describing the Slavs as Untermenschen. Hitler even threatened to invade Slavic countries as part of his Lebensraum, or living space policy. However, until the Second World War, this group were treated relatively less badly. The group that Hitler considered to be as bad as the Jewish people were called Gypsies by the Nazis. This group was made up of three main groups: Sinti, the Roma and the Yenish. In total, there were around 26,000 members of this group in Germany. The Nazis despised them because they lived by moving around, and the Nazis accused them of not working and being a drain on the state. They were often arrested as social nuisances, and from 1936, some were forced to live in camps with very poor facilities. In 1938, travelling communities were banned from travelling in groups, and they were rounded up and put on a register. They were tested for their racial characteristics, and if the Nazis did not like what they found, then their citizenship was removed. The Roma and other groups were subject to the Nuremberg Laws in the same way as the Jewish people were. Gay men were also treated as untermenschen by the Nazis. They believed that gay men lowered the moral standard of Germany. In 1934, 766 men accused of being gay were arrested and imprisoned in concentration camps, and in 1935, a series of stricter laws against being gay were passed. By 1936, the number arrested was 4,000, and in 1938, 8,000. Once in the camp, gay men were often picked out for bullying and torture, and it is estimated that around 5,000 men died in the concentration camps before 1939. Even for those who survived, the Nazi laws encouraged the castration, which is the removal of their reproductive organs, for gay men. Finally, the other group that was singled out for ill treatment were those with disabilities. The Nazis believed that those with disabilities were a burden on society. Again, in propaganda and school lessons, the burden of the state was highlighted. In 1933, the law for the prevention of hereditary disease was passed, which ordered the compulsory sterilisation of anyone with a disability. This included those with mental disabilities, alcoholics, people born with missing limbs, epilepsy, and those who were deaf or blind. Over 400,000 people were prevented from having children in this way by 1939. In 1939, however, the Nazis escalated the persecution of the disabled to murder, when they ordered babies with severe mental or physical disabilities to be murdered either by starvation or by lethal injection. This was called the T4 program. Eventually it was expanded to include the murder of anyone up to 17 years of age. By the outbreak of World War II, 5,000 children had been murdered. And finally, we come to the persecution of the Jewish people. I've left this group to the last because they were the most comprehensively persecuted of all the groups. While less than 1% of the population was Jewish, Hitler had made his views on the Jewish people clear in Mein Kampf. Nazi propaganda called them filth and vermin and described Jewish people as evil and scheming. Propaganda was everywhere, from children's books to films and the cinema. We've already seen how Jewish people were pushed out of the workplace in April 1933 when they were banned from working in the government and from being civil servants or teachers. Then in September 1933, Jewish people were banned from inheriting property. In May 1935, Jewish people were banned from the army. Many local authorities run by Nazis followed the central government's lead, and Jewish people were banned from swimming pools and parks in 1934, while some local authorities painted benches yellow to signify Jews only. But from as early as March 1933, the Nazis began to manipulate public opinion and actions against the Jewish communities. During March 1933, the Nazis ran a campaign against Jewish shops and businesses. Then, on March 30th, they announced that from 10 a.m. on the 1st of April, there would be an official boycott. The SA was sent to paint a Star of David, or the German word for Jew, Jude, on the front of Jewish businesses. The SA then stood outside these businesses with placards. On the 15th of September 1935, the Nazis passed the Nuremberg Laws. These were laws designed to make life nigh on impossible for Jewish people, Roma and Sinti people, and black people. There were two sections to the laws: the Reich Law of Citizenship and the Reich Law for the Protection of German Blood and Honor. The citizenship laws removed German citizenship from anyone deemed not to be of German blood. This was defined in a rather arbitrary way. Those with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents were deemed to be Jewish. This meant that even those who had converted or given up their religion could still be counted, and some who had only 1 or 2 Jewish grandparents were not counted even though they were practicing Jews. However, all those who fell into the Nazis category were now German subjects rather than citizens. Their passports were rescinded and they lost the right to vote or hold government office. Jewish people now had to wear an armband with a yellow star to show their lack of citizenship. The Reich Law for the Protection of German Blood and Honor forbade Germans to marry those deemed to be Jewish and also banned sexual relations between Jewish people and German citizens. The situation for Jewish people escalated further after this, with a law passed in March 1938 forcing Jewish people to register all their possessions with the government, meaning the government could take whatever they wanted. And then in July 1938, all Jewish people had to carry an ID card, making it easier for the authorities to identify them. All of this came to a head on the 7th of November 1938, when a Polish Jew, Herschel Grishpan, walked into the German embassy in Paris and randomly shot the first German he saw. Herschel was angry at the way his parents were being treated by the Nazis. The German Ernst von Rath was badly wounded and taken to hospital. This was the opportunity that the Nazis had been looking for. They hyped up the attack and exaggerated the event, printing articles in the media saying he had been part of a Jewish conspiracy. SS and SA soldiers were sent to attack Jewish homes, businesses and synagogues in Hanover. Then, on the 9th of November, von Rath died. Now the Nazis spread their violence nationwide. Police were ordered not to intervene in any violence they saw against Jewish people or property. SS groups were sent to arrest Jewish people. The night of the 8th of November was the worst night of violence against the Jewish population of Germany seen so far. The night became known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of the Broken Glass, because of the destruction wrought. Gangs of men smashed and burned Jewish property and physically assaulted Jewish people. The SS, SA and Hitler Youth were ordered not to wear uniforms so they would appear to be members of the general public and would therefore encourage other members of the public to participate in the orgy of violence. Responses from the public were mixed. Some were horrified, but the police state ensured that they said nothing, while others approved of the violence and some took part. In one night, 814 shops, 171 homes and 191 synagogues were attacked and destroyed by the mobs. Around 100 Jewish people were killed and around 20,000 arrested and sent to concentration camps. Goebbels was quick to blame the Jewish communities for the violence, and they were fined 1 billion marks to repair the damage that had been done against them. Also, after Kristallnacht, the persecution of Jewish people escalated further. In January 1939, Hitler declared that all Jewish people were to be evicted from Germany. Heydrich, who you will remember was the head of the Gestapo, now headed up the Reich Office for Jewish Emigration. From April 1939, Jewish people were evicted from their homes and properties seized by the Nazis. And that was the situation for Jewish people when the war began. It is hard for us to understand why the German people just allowed this to happen. Certainly some of the activities were carried out in secret, but the vast majority were carried out in public and were known about throughout Germany and abroad, including Britain and America. Hundreds of thousands of Germans took active part in the persecution of these groups, and millions more did nothing to stop them. Some may have been too afraid, since opponents of the Nazis were dealt with harshly and publicly, but there were millions who believed the propaganda and believed that the persecution of these groups was justified. Okay, that is everything for Weimar and Nazi Germany. Don't forget to check out my website for worksheets and revision guidance, and I will see you next time for the Cold War.